What is good, everyone? This is your host, Deanna Radulescu with Label Free Podcast. Live your best life. You must live label free. As always, bringing incredible guests from all over the world. So sit back, relax, and tune in. My next guest is Chair of Alliance Pray. He is an author, prayer mobilizer, a sought-after media guest, and an ordained pastor. Please welcome Dr. David Chotka. Dr. David, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Deanna. It's a delight to be here.
It's a delight to have you here. Before we got started, we were going in many different directions around all the amazing things that you have witnessed and been a part of in your life as living in this spiritual space.
Yep.
I loved the story you told me about Uganda and about your wife. So I kind of want to kick it off a little bit there about, I don't know, what do you want to start with your wife?
Well, actually, we should start how the wife thing happened. So
okay,
there's a healing story that's in the healing prayer book, and that's where we're going to go.
Okay.
But it started with a desire just to serve. I mean, I was serving a congregation in northern Alberta, and I wound up partnering with two American congregations, one from New York and one from Atlanta. Okay. And we wanted to go over to Uganda to help them rebuild after they had been through two war zones. I mean, we're talking about the madness of Idi Amin. Of course, there's a movie, Last King of Scotland, about him. Horrible man. And then Joseph Kony, that awful warlord who would, make these child soldiers do horrible things that you don't want repeated on your program.
Yeah, no.
Anyway, the two were defeated, and they lost their ground. One was executed, and one had to go out of the country, and nobody knows where he is now. But regardless of this, my church made a decision to go for 3 years in a row. We did about three things. We did build projects, we did community service things, and I did teaching for the pastors and the leaders in the town. Because, 20 years of war zone, your young people don't know how to read.
Yeah.
And so you're going to get a town elder. It's going to be somebody who can actually spell. This is the state they were in. And so we built a library, we built a latrine, we built a school. And I would teach these pastors. And there was an organizer who organized 750 to 1,000 pastors each time we did this. And then I would go in and I would train them and I would encourage them. And actually, the very first book I ever wrote is this one. And I wrote it for them. I didn't write it for me. I wrote it for them. It's a training manual on the content of the Lord's Prayer. And I was basically showing them what each key word in the Lord's Prayer meant, et cetera, et cetera. And the very first people to receive that book were the Ugandans. I didn't intend for it to be an American or a Canadian book. It was intended to help them to get started. Anyway, I would go there and I'd teach these 3 years in a row. And we spent a lot of money. My church spent about $500,000 because we were feeding 750 to 1,000 of these pastors who'd travel in on their own dime and then get fed on the spot. And we gave them the book and we gave them other resources and we gave them, pens and papers and those kinds of basic things.
Yeah.
And then my church said to me, David, we're paying a lot of money here. We'd kind of like to meet this guy, So in the course of time, we brought this fellow in. And he's telling stories from the pulpit about the things that happened in the middle of the war zone. He's telling these. I don't know if you've met any World War II vets who had, grandmas and grandpas tell these stories where grandma's praying and grandpa's spared because the bullet misses him because she's up in the night praying. Those were the kind of stories this guy was telling from the pulpit. And we had three congregations. We had a Saturday night, we had a Sunday morning at 9:00, and a Sunday at 11. And he comes on Saturday night, and the stories are so compelling and amazing that all those Saturday nighters walk up to me and to him and say, listen, tell different stories tomorrow. We're coming back. So they text all their friends. And, of course, we get an oversized 9:00 congregation now. The smallest one was Saturday. The second largest was 9:00, and the big one was 11:00. So anyway, we got this oversized 9:00 congregation, and he tells more of these amazing stories. Everybody's on the edge of their seat. And then he comes to the 11:00, and by now it's jammed to the rafters. The place is absolutely filled. Now, that congregation could seat about 450, and we had an overflow for an extra 100. And we had people lined up along the walls and up and down the aisles, and there was just no room for anybody else to be in there.
Yeah.
I had to sit on the steps where I would usually tell the children's story next to the preacher.
Wow. Now,
what your audience doesn't know is my wife was afflicted with muscular dystrophy. So right now, as we speak, Lululemon the founder of Lululemon has the same kind of muscular dystrophy. It's called FSH, muscular dystrophy, facioscapular heavier. Okay. He's just given $100 million to the MD Association in the States to look for a medical cure. But at this point in history, there is no medical cure. The way it manifests is your arms and muscles start to sag. Your shoulder blades go out of position. You are unable to smile very much. You can't whistle because the muscles don't work.
Right.
You get scoliosis, and then if you lose a muscle, it's gone forever. Oh. It begins to manifest between 16 and 20. And it starts with chronic pain. And then you don't die young, but you die in a wheelchair. Oh, wow. Your feet shuffle. You can't go up and down stairs. And you can't raise your arms higher than your shoulders. And my wife had this. But, hey, first girl to look like jokes. So, when her mom had it, her sister has it, her niece has it, she had it. So it's a genetic thing. Anyway, the bottom line is I'm sitting in church and I'm looking over at my wife. And at this point, she's been unable to raise her arms above her shoulders for about 20 years. And this bishop, he's telling these amazing stories. And he's in the middle of one of these moments where you're just about to get to the climax of the story. And he stopped and he looked down at me and he said, with his very thick accent, I don't want to make fun of it, but I'll try and just give you a sense of it. He said, David, what is M.A.? And I thought, M.A. Master of Arts? I don't know. And he said, no, I've got something wrong. And he stops his story and he puts his head on the pulpit while all these people are sitting there waiting with bated breath for the end of his war story. Yeah. And then he looks at me and then he says, it's a wasting muscle disease. It starts in your head and it goes down. It causes your face to sag. You get scoliosis in your spine. Your shoulder blades go out of position. And between 16 and 20, you wind up in chronic pain. And he started telling, it was an exact medical treatment for the affliction. And then, listen, I have this on CD because we had CDs in those days. Yeah. He looked at me and he said, whoever has this, Jesus has just healed you. Now I'm looking how
oh my God, I'm going to cry.
So her arms go above her head for the first time in more than 20 years.
Oh my God.
And she doesn't feel any pain anymore. And she wasn't even conscious. She raised her hands.
Yeah.
Because the pain was gone and she was so focused on the story and on the storyteller, she didn't even notice what she was doing. But everybody around her knew. We'd been in that church 5 years. And all the people, there were women sitting beside her who were her friends who'd help her clean the house because she couldn't move the couch. She couldn't move the vacuum. Yeah. She couldn't lift up things to be able to clean underneath them. And they'd come and give her a hand. I mean, this is the kind of care she got. And so we had company that weekend because people were trying to ask themselves whether or not they wanted to travel with us to Uganda. And of course, they had to pay their airfare, that kind of thing. Yeah. So it was a bit pricey. But they flew in and we had guests in our home. And so the plan was that we would go home and I would get on the top shelves and take down all the heavy pots and pans that she would use to cook for the larger crowd. Sure. And I walk in the house. She pushes me out of the way. She stands on that thing and she starts taking down heavy objects that she couldn't carry. And you got to know, I was in awe.
Sure.
Awe. Now, we really knew she was. It was a funny story after this. About a week later, my son and my daughter were sitting at breakfast, and I don't know why this happened, but here's what happened. My wife and my daughter and son. So we're all sitting there.
Yeah.
And my daughter, who is always gentle and sweet and kind, tries to push her brother's buttons, and she knows exactly which emotional buttons to push. And she keeps it up for like 15, 20 minutes. And finally, my son is doing his valiant best to try and be a good lad and not react to it, trying to calm her down. And it doesn't work, and it doesn't work. And finally, I just about had enough. And I was ready to discipline my daughter when suddenly my wife stood up and she stomped her feet and she said, "Oh, Jessica Chotka, that's enough." And she took her by the hand and ran her up the stairs, got down beside her bed, made her pick up all her toys, made her make her bed, got her in the bathroom, made her brush her teeth, ran her down the stairs, got her in the van, drove her to school. We were so mad.
Yeah.
We didn't realize she'd run up the stairs.
Right.
She knelt down and got up unaided.
Yeah.
She got her in the bathroom, ran down the stairs. You can't do that with FSH muscular dystrophy.
Wow.
You can't. So our doctor, I have a doctor's note that I'd be happy to send your way. Our doctor had known her for 5 years before this and was helping her get accommodations for all of the things that were attached to the decline of physical health.
Right.
There's no cure. And then he saw her and she was well. And And he waited 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, he wrote the medical note saying that all traces of FSH muscular dystrophy.
Wow.
Now, that story's in my healing prayer book. And but you know what? We weren't looking to, for her to get well. We were looking to serve. That's what we And we were looking to the healer to guide us. We weren't looking for the healing. We were looking to the healer to guide us. And our desire was to be helpful to people who had nothing. That was the reason we did what we did.
Wow.
And it turned into this amazing boomerang. And that's how faith works. You give and it shall be given unto you. That's how faith works.
Absolutely. Gosh.
I know what you want to do with that story.
Wow.
It's changed my life forever,
God works in amazing, mysterious ways. And just look, I mean, anybody that might be listening and might be a non-believer, or you're searching for something. I mean, I teared up. There's no denying that. I mean, for me, there's no denying that God is powerful and all knowing. And, in that moment knew that you guys needed that. And,
yes.
And I mean, how long has it been since that moment?
That was in 2009. This is 2024. So how many years is that now? So
here's 15 years.
So let me tell you something. So I described 5 different kinds of healing in the book, and I now include one that I didn't think to do before that. Before that moment happened, I never regarded ordinary healing, where you cut your finger, you wash your hand, and you put a bandage on. I never thought of that as miraculous. But you see, when she damaged the muscle before, the muscle never regrew.
Right.
And when she damaged the muscle now, the muscle grows back.
Oh, wow.
And so, in my mind, ordinary healing in a body is miracle.
Absolutely.
And I didn't understand that before this whole thing took place. So I described 5 different kinds of healing. One's the instant heal. I just told you an instant heal story. One of them is what I call the natural heal, where you cut your finger and you wash it and you clean it off and it heals. The next is a pathway to a remedy. And I believe in this.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of people out there right now who are in medicine because somebody they loved is afflicted or died. And they have spent 25 years or 30 years of their life trying to look for a solution or a remedy or even an application to try and help somebody.
Yeah.
And if that winds up on your front burner and somebody's given you 25 years of their life, take the gift.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Take the gift. Then there's this thing called suffering that we don't understand. And there are seasons where we go through that and there is no answer. And then, of course, at the end of life, we have this thing where we pass over into the presence. And I consider all 5 of those legitimate pathways in this journey of trying to get to a place of health. Because health is not just physical. Health is mental, emotional, spiritual. It is sociological. It is belonging to a culture. And what I've discovered is all 5 of those run in pathways sometimes that don't overlap.
Yeah.
And every now and then they do.
Yeah.
And then every now and then they separate out. And all 5 of those intertwine and separate out as is best for us to grow and develop. Yes.
I love that.
Well, I've learned this the hard way.
No, don't we all, though? Don't we all? I mean,
yes, we all.
I think that's the only way that we learn. If it comes easy, nobody's going to learn.
That's right. That's right. So, I mean, that story by itself was one of the reasons why I wanted to write the Healing Prayer Book. Now, it's a co-write with a very famous author. It's a co-write with Reverend Dr. Maxie Dunham. Maxie has a million-seller called this one here, called The Workbook of Living Prayer. This is sold. This is in 16 languages, and it's gone around the planet. It's 1 million sold in the U.S. alone. So I don't know what it's like across the rest of the planet. Sure. But I never dreamed I'd meet this man. And through a whole series of amazing events, he first of all became a mentor, and then he became a co-writer. And the 2 of us together have co-written this book. His story at the beginning of the book is of the healing of his grandson. Mm. And the reason why he said yes to writing with me was because his grandson got married, and then he remembered, like 30 years before, the grandson was 30 when he got married. And his daughter is married to a medical doctor.
Okay.
But his daughter, Kim, married to a medical doctor, started to have a family, and their firstborn was this boy named Nathan. And he had extreme nystagmus in his eyes. The eyes were vibrating.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which made it very difficult for him to see. And then when they took the child to an eye doctor, because, they're medical people, she married a doctor, he noticed that there was a very, very damaged optic nerve on both sides, called optic nerve hypoplasia. And so because they were medical people, they knew that that was serious. The child could be blind.
Oh, wow.
And the whole thrust of their life was now upended. I mean, this is their firstborn, and they have this happen to this child, and they don't know what to do. Well, they continue with life, and, Kim's husband gets a medical scholarship to go study in Hartford. And he goes off to Hartford, and they have to change doctors. Okay. And they have a file in hand with all of the data, all the findings about that optic nerve hypoplasia and the stigmas.
Yeah.
And so Kim, the daughter, Maxie's daughter, goes to the new eye doctor and says, "Here's my son, please examine him." Yeah. And she held the file in reserve.
Right.
Looked at the eyes.
Be prepared.
Said, those eyes are fine. And she said, no, please examine the optic nerve. So he examines the optic nerve. Oh, yeah, it's nice and healthy. It's pink. It's growing. It's good. What? And there's hardly any. So what happened was, when Maxie, my co-author, heard that his grandson was afflicted, he was the head of the Upper Room Publishing House. And so he's got 50 books under his belt, but he would help rising authors. And he had a prayer room that was attached to the Upper Room. And he got all these people all across the world who belonged to all things Methodist to start to seek the Lord for his grandson. And because many people had been blessed by his writing, they prayed in earnest. And so, so here's what happened. So Kim, his daughter, has this child in the doctor's office. He says so she passes the file to the new doctor.
Sure, yeah.
He reads the medical information, and all the stigmas that almost vanished, there was just a little trace of it. And then he deliberately examines the optic nerves and finds that there's no affliction whatsoever. And so then they take this child to another doctor to get a second opinion.
Sure.
The doctor said the same thing as the second doctor, not the first. But the two doctors knew the first one. And so they knew that they were peers and they were doing good research. And when it was all said and done, when the child got married, everybody started telling the story of Nathan's healings. So that's what led Maxie to say yes to co-write with me, because he'd experienced a gradual transformation of his grandson as hundreds prayed. And I had this experience of instant heal with my wife.
Yeah.
And in between those two poles, we had also prayed with many who died young or dealt with difficulty or strife or had mental afflictions or whatever. And we didn't want to shortchange human suffering. The goal of the book was not to shortchange human suffering. It was to alleviate it. And it's to say that your faith is not weak if you are in the middle of some medical crisis.
Right.
It's to say to you that the community of faith needs to come around you and join you. And that healing prayer is not your idea, it's God's.
Yeah.
God was the guy who told us to pray for the sick to become well. He's the one who told us to do this. So you're not being arrogant, you're not being pushy, you're not shortchanging your faith if you find yourself with diabetes or something.
Right.
You're not somebody who doesn't know God if you wind up having trouble with your arthritis or whatever the issue today happens to be. We wanted to say that all of us are on this healing journey and that there are many different ways that healing shows up in a life. Yeah. And that praying for healing in the middle of your trouble is legitimate and necessary.
Yeah.
And even if you do not see a physical transformation, your emotional state will change when you bring these matters inside the framework of faith to a place of prayer.
Yeah.
You'll become a different person when you do that.
Hi, guys. This is your host, Deanna Radulescu with Label Free Podcast. I'm here to share another exciting partnership with you. I have joined forces with doTERRA. They are the leading provider of high-quality essential oils. I've got some here I like to consume, the ones that are consumable. So like sweet orange is really great. I also really, really love their toothpaste. Natural whitening and just kind of really helps clean your mouth. You know, we do carry a lot of germs in our mouth, but I've loved this toothpaste. I've ordered it many times. These are some supplements. Here is the Lifelong Vitality Pack. Really great products, high quality products. Definitely recommend it. I also really love the collagen. NMN is a proven anti-aging product. So the collagen and the NMN together is a real game changer. I'm big into collagen. I believe it. I've been taking it for like 20 years before it's even gotten so popular. And that's probably why I maintain my skin elasticity, my hair and nails. I highly recommend checking out doTERRA if you're a fan of high quality essential oils. Not all essential oils are created the same. Go click the links in the description, sign up, or take advantage of one of my bundles that I'm recommending to you with the toothpaste, also the cleaning products and the supplements. So you guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you, and stay tuned for more to come. Is it ever too late for someone to start believing in the power of prayer?
how the thief on the cross was hanging there. We just went through Resurrection Sunday. And so there was two thieves. Jesus was in the middle.
Right.
And so this one guy who's almost dead starts defending the other guy who's attacked, he's being attacked.
Right.
And so then he says, "Oh, Jesus, remember me," just before he dies. And he didn't have a chance to get baptized. There was no opportunity for him to do anything. But he did say to the other guy, "Stop attacking the innocent man." And Jesus remembered me. So at the end of his days, he was able to say yes. Mm. So it's never too late. Yeah. My father didn't know if he could believe. It was a very strange thing for me to go into ministry. My dad had suffered much. He was kicked by a horse when he was 6 years old, lost most of his eyesight. And so his jaw got broke, and Ukrainian immigrants living in Prairie, Canada, in small village, didn't know what to do to help this young boy. His sister, who was working in Winnipeg, had come home for a visit, found him sick in bed, got him to the hospital just in time to save his life. But the damage was severe. His eye muscles could no longer move eyes right to left in his head. And he had to wear Coke bottle thick glasses for the rest of his days. Couldn't open his jaw much. And he didn't believe that God could be a God of love. Didn't believe it. And when I went into the ministry, it was, what are you doing? Why'd you be a dentist? Why'd you be a doctor? Make some money, that kind of thing. You don't live on the people like that. Now, by the way, I don't know if there is a God, and he'd alternate between agnosticism, because he'd watch things grow.
Yeah.
Say things can't grow unless there's some kind of power there. And atheism, when he'd see violence or evil. Or if he saw an earthquake where just not lives were taken and there was no reason behind this.
Right. Yeah.
Good and bad both died together in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He, when the day was done, he had so my call to the ministry involved my dad coming to faith. So I was standing at a refrigerator one night, and all my marks were within 1 or 2% of each other. Yeah. And I just had no sense of I want this or I want that. It was all, just about the same. And I said to my dad, "Dad, I don't know what to do with my life." And he looked at me and he laughed and he said, "Why don't you have a good sleep in your in the morning?" One of those crazy father-son chats.
Yeah.
So I go up to bed and I wake up in the morning and I know I'm going to be pastor. I just know. And so I didn't tell him that I went to school. And in those days I had a spare in the day. And I walked into a guidance counselor and I said, "I want to go into the ministry." And he said, "Well, what denomination?" I said, "I don't like my church." And he said, "Why did you come to mine?" It was the same denomination, but they had this delightful English-speaking accent guy who smoked a pipe and blew smoke rings and talked about Jesus while he put his feet on the desk. And he played the accordion for the kids at the children's school. Yeah, it was lots of fun, right?
Yeah.
And so that fellow looked at me and he said, "You need to bloom where you're planted. So go back to your church. They love you there and you'll be fine." I said, "I don't want to go." And he said, "Well, look, if you want, you can show up here from time to time. But, your church loves you." So I went there. And as it turned out, the next day, I booked in to see my own pastor. And I sat down in the office and he said, "You're going to the ministry." I said, "How did you know?" He said, "I've been praying about it for about a year. You're going to the ministry. And by the way, the board meets tonight. And we haven't had a candidate for the ministry in 20 years. And the church is turning 100 this year. You'll be our centennial candidate for the year." I said, "Oh." And then ordinarily in the denomination I was in the States, it would be the United States.
How old were you then?
I was in my teens. So 18, 19, something like that.
Okay.
So but ordinarily you had to go through a bunch of exams. There were 3 major things that you had to go through.
Right. Okay.
And it's usually spread out over 2 years. And all of those teams were meeting in a week. I got launched by the church. The congregation accepted me. I became the centennial candidate. Within 7 days, it was done.
Wow.
And so I walked up to my dad, who'd seen me at the refrigerator that night. I said, "Have a good sleep." I said, "Oh, by the way, Dad, over the last week, something's happened." He said, "What's that?" I said, "I'm going to the ministry." And his jaw dropped. He turned white as a ghost.
Yeah.
And he said, "We have to talk." I said, "Okay, Dad." So anyway, that afternoon, he had a shot of whiskey. He couldn't bear this thing. He had a shot of whiskey. He took the thing in one fell swoop and he started to physically shake. Now, he had been a bouncer in a bar. He was a tough guy.
Yeah.
And, he was running a restaurant now, but back in the day, he was shaking profusely. And I said, "Dad, what happened?" He said, "Well, you remember when you said, I said, you go to sleep and get up in the morning and you'll know what to do."
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah, that's how this started the whole thing." He said, "I have to tell you what happened." I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "I went to bed And I pulled the covers up. Your mother was already asleep. And the Lord appeared to me and walked up to me and said, your son David is dreaming about me. Go upstairs, ask him what he dreams, and tell him he's going to be a pastor and he's going to write books and he's going to travel the planet.
Oh, wow.
And so my dad, I think he was in a crazy dream. He gets out of bed. He walks up the stairs. He sees me. There's two brothers in the room. They're fast asleep. I'm sleeping in the middle. He tries to wake me. I don't wake up. And then he comes to himself and says to himself, I don't even believe in this. Well, this is a crazy dream. So he goes back down to bed. He gets himself back inside the covers. He pulls the cover up, and the Lord reappears to him, picks him up by the scruff of his pajamas and stands him to his feet and says, you must wake your son and ask him what he dreams and ask him now the dream is fading. And my dad said, go away. And he said, no, you must go. So he went up, he shook me, and I don't remember this. My dad told me this several times after it happened. And I had the same dream as he did. I saw the things that he described. And then he said, well, Jesus of Nazareth told me to tell you, you're going to do these three things. And then he went back to bed and he forgot about it and said that was a nutty dream. And then this stuff all happened in the framework of 7 days. It was done. And so I started to train for the ministry.
Wow.
So that's how it happened. But now that's coming in a new book I'm writing. I just wrote the story out yesterday. In fact, the reason it's fresh to me to tell you is because I was trying to remember my dad passed away a few years ago. But oh man, he struggled with believing, really struggled because of all of the violence and the ugliness and the war. Actually, he had family and friends who died in Stalin's Holocaust in 1932 when he killed 7 million Ukrainians, shot and took over East Ukraine. And so he didn't believe, he worked with people at his job who had been survivors of that Holocaust. Their families were dead. He was working with them, and he couldn't understand how a God of love could allow such ugliness to happen in the framework of life. And there's no answer to the question. I mean, the bottom line is, I wish I could tell you why that happened.
I think that there can't be good without evil, unfortunately.
Well, that's until God returns at the end of time.
Correct.
Right. Made well.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Sadly, I believe you're right, although I don't like the answer.
I know, but it's just, we have to choose, right? And that's like why we have free will, and you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be.
Morgan Freeman said that when he played God.
I don't know if I've ever read well yet. I don't know if I've ever watched that. But no, I mean, we do. We have free will, and you have to decide. And I think that's why there is good and evil. You know, you're either going to choose to be, a person of faith and believe in God and pray, or you're going to be on this other side. And I know that there's people in between, but eventually at the end of the day, we do decide who we're going to be.
Well, you got to do your own believing, just like you got to do your own dying. Nobody can do it for you. That's what Luther said. Yeah. Anyway, the bottom line is, I don't like, how do I say this? I believe in honest life.
Yes.
And if there is evil, you name it. And if there is good, you name it. And if there is unbelief, you name it. And if there is a lie, you name it. If there's truth, you name it. That's how I live. And I can forgive anything except somebody lies to me. I have the hardest time forgiving somebody who lies to me.
Yeah.
If you're going to lie to me, then I can't, there's no hope for anything we're going to do here.
Yeah.
If on the other hand, you say, I'm a drug addict, and by the way, I got AIDS, and I got it because I was sleeping around. If I will sit with that man or that woman, and I will walk them through anything. But if you start lying to me, I can't help you.
Well, I agree. Then they're not ready to they're not ready to be better, I guess. I don't know. Well, you have one question here that I want to say before we start wrapping things up. For people that are listening, if you're a non-believer, believer, if you're starting to be explore your faith, whatever it might be, it's never too late. But this is something that really struck me in Dr. David's bio is, if I claim to hear God, am I included in Club Crazy? What do I do about it?
Yeah. Well, straight up, I just told you a couple of those stories.
Yes. Right. So that's why I wanted to highlight, there are many, 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 many stories of miracles happening to people because of their faith, and it is not Club Crazy. And what would you say to that question?
Well, if they do not know the people who are the recipients of the miracle, as the before and after, they will say you're in Club Crazy. If, on the other hand...
And that's a label.
Yes. Yeah, no label. You don't want those labels. He's nuts. So my wife, she tells me, David, you start telling those stories, sane people will think you're crazy and crazy people will think you're sane. I said, well, what am I going to do? I have to be honest with what's happened to me. And she said, well, we have to make sure that all these stories have verifications attached to them. Okay. And so when I tell stories that have to do with faith, I would always make sure that there was some way to verify the story that I'm telling you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you can't, right now, I cannot reproduce my dad because he's gone on to his reward. Right. But there were many times where he did tell, my parents ran a diner. And in the diner, you get people swearing and you get people drinking tea with their little finger up. Sometimes they sit beside each other. Yeah. And these crazy conversations would happen. Yeah. And there were people of faith and there were people who hated faith and there were people who didn't care. And there were people in the middle and there were genuine inquirers and there were people who were curious but not seeking and all those kinds of combinations.
Right.
And the way the restaurant was designed, it was a double S and there were these little stools and you'd sit next to each other and there was a regular clientele. And I can't tell you the number of times we talked about this issue. And you'd have people who would look at you and if they knew you over years, they would believe you. Yeah. If they didn't know you over years, they would think you're nuts. And so the only way to talk about dealing with club crazy is to have a legitimate encounter and then to live what you believe.
Right.
Now, for example, even in my own family, there are people who just could not believe that my wife was healed. But I have one family member who would yell at me if I'd walk into the room because I was a Christ follower and he wasn't. And this went on for years. And he was at my wedding. And then he knew that my wife was declining. He knew that her sister was in a wheelchair and her mom was in a wheelchair and her niece is going in that direction. And then when the healing happened, all criticism stopped.
Wow.
And then he said to my son, don't tell your dad. I believe like him too. He couldn't bring himself to say it.
I'm afraid of the Lord.
So the only way to go at this, the bottom line is you live what you believe and everybody does that. Yeah. Everybody lives what they believe.
Yeah.
And whether you believe in, if you don't believe in life after death or you believe in life after death, you will live the way that you believe because what you honor is what you become.
Yeah.
And so what you'd have to do in the middle of this is not to try to stick a crowbar into somebody's brain and convert them or something like that. You don't need to do that.
Right.
You simply have to live what you believe and declare when it's a legitimate conversation.
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse than somebody looking for an opportunity to be able to shove something down your throat. And by the way, business people do that too, not just faith.
Dr. David, with that being said, where can people find you, connect with you, purchase the book, and support you and all the great work that you do?
Well, actually, I've got a website, www.spiritequip. So it's like spirit, like Holy Spirit, and equip like equipment. Those two words together.com. And there's links to my Facebook page, my Instagram, my YouTube, and all the different things that I do together with courses that I offer and so on. But the book itself, there's links to the book on my website. Okay. But that book, Healing Prayer, is available anywhere books are sold. You can go to Walmart and buy that book if you want to. You just have to ask for it because I'm sure your average Walmart won't stock it. But it's also at Barnes & Noble and it's at Books A Million, and it's you can get it. You can get it over. In fact, I had friends get it at Walmart on purpose and wanted them to do that. Or you can order it on ChristianBook.com or whatever. The name of the company is Whitaker House. It's a big publishing house. It runs Anchor Book Distributors. That's the largest distributor of Christian books in the world. And they're in the United States. They're in Pittsburgh, just outside Pittsburgh.
Wow.
And that company organizes for all kinds of other publishing companies. And many of them have vanished. And for whatever reason, Whitaker still manages to be there. And they have made arrangements with all of the large publishing outlets that and bookstores and so on to be able to stock the book if somebody asks for it. So if you want to find it in a hurry, you use my name, Chotka. People don't, that nobody else in the United States is called that. But if you want to find it in a hurry as well, you can just Google Healing Prayer. It's the most recent title on prayer for healing that's out in the market right now. And you'll automatically be brought to the book with my name and Maxie Dunham's name on it. Or you can look at Maxie's book as well, at Maxie's name, Dunham, Dunnam, and Google that, and you'll be brought to that book. So that's the best way to do it. But I have a charity, and I have a Canadian and an American give point, and I am going to be traveling. I have a burden to help the persecuted church. And in October, I'm going to be traveling to Vietnam, one of my books has been translated into Vietnamese.
Oh, wow.
And those pastors and leaders have not been allowed to have Christian literature until the last couple of years. Wow. So I'm doing a fundraiser to try and give that book to them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's going to happen in October. Okay. And so I'm looking forward to that trip. I will be translating to Vietnamese. But there's 1,700 pastors in my denomination. There's only 2 denominations that are sanctioned by the communist government, the Roman Catholic Church and the Christian Missionary Alliance. Those are the 2 that are there. Okay. And because I belong to that denomination and I can get a letter from them, I can travel there with government consent because the denomination's already there.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I can't print the book outside of Vietnam. I have to print it in country. There's an editorial team there. Okay. Otherwise, they'll make all kinds of trouble. So my big charity project this year is to get that book there.
Perfect. All right, you guys, I'm going to put his links in the show notes. So if you connect with Dr. David and want to learn more, support him, get the books, follow him, just need your daily dose of spirit, go ahead and click the links, go give him a follow, go check out his website and purchase the book. Dr. David, this is the part of the show where I like to ask for last words of wisdom or advice. What would you like to leave with us today?
Listen, God's desire to communicate with us is bigger than our desire to hear. And he will use whatever means is necessary to be in touch with you. So you don't have to be afraid to talk to him. He'll talk right back. And he will speak Deanna to Deanna, and he'll speak David to David, and he'll speak Susie to Susie, and John to John, and Frank to Frank.
Yeah.
And if you need a touch from him, it will come.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing those incredible, miraculous stories that renewed my faith, and I hope it renewed those of you that are listening, because God is just very powerful, and prayer is powerful, and I'm just so thankful for this conversation. Thank you very much.
It's been a joy to be with you. God bless you.
And God bless you. You guys, this is your host, Deanna Radulescu with Label Free Podcasts. Live your best life. You must live label free. As always, don't forget to subscribe, follow, rate, review, comment, share, all those good things. And I'll be back soon with more dynamic guests.